welcome to episode 5 of the People's Project. Great lineup tonight. 4 awesome guests. First of all, Chair of Epidemiology from Deakin University, Catherine Bennett, very cool. Morgan C. Jonas, who's going to be talking to us about testing kits and why the government is really pushing out this whole must get tested. Number 3, everyone's hero, Catherine Cumming, the independent MP, who is, I know, her favourite. And lastly, a lawyer from New South Wales. We wanted to get an idea of what the legal fraternity think about these lockdowns. So
I interviewed Catherine Bennett. So she's the chair of epidemiology at Deakin University, and I just learned how to say epidemiology properly for that interview. Anyway, do you want to hear what she's got to say?
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, great.
Roll it.
Andrews says on many occasions that he always consults with the experts. Do you know who these experts are, and would you want to be one of those if you could be?
The experts are the in-house experts. So that's the public health team they have, and they do have a team of people that been working on this from the start. They've got a broader team, people who've been involved in outbreak response, but I'm not sure how much they cut into this. I think the public health team's very much had the COVID focus. They did bring in experts. The Australian government used the Doherty modelers early on, and that was really just to say, well, looking at our population and what we know from around the world with this virus, what could it look like? What's the starting position if we did nothing? And a lot of people have said, well, we'd never do nothing, but that was actually a starting point that allowed us to start to estimate what the impact could be, and then we had to build off that base to decide how far we would take our containment measures. And beyond that, they've brought in other modellers, particularly most recently they've now had people from the NCRI come in to do the modelling around schools, which to my mind is the first time I've seen the modelling really used to good effect. You ask the right questions, you say what happens if we open up these year levels now, or with the numbers we have, is it safe with what we know about transmission amongst children and in those contained settings? And they were able to bring forward opening up because the modelling showed that, get it right, do it staged, this can work. So it reassured the government, and I think everybody is now very pleased that, that's the outcome. The modelling from the Burnet Institute's interesting because that really fits the data well, unlike the September 6 modelling, which was a model they put together at the time based on historic data, but which now doesn't fit the data, and we know that, and they know that. The modellers talk about it themselves. And they didn't, the amount of cases they predicted for September 17, only a couple of weeks in, was out by 43%. They overestimated. So the model isn't a good fit for the situation we're in. And as it turns out, they were actually asked to model going from step 3 to something like stage 2. So stage 3 to stage 2, which we weren't going to stage 2 and we weren't in stage 3. So I'm not sure why you do it. But same with Burnet. They've got a good fitting model now because they've got all the data of the second wave to build the model around. But they were asked to assess the likelihood of another, large wave if we opened up either back at the end of the original plan stage 4 or now with a certain number of cases. But they were opening up to the final step, to when you can have 200 people at an event and you can have any people you like in your home and no restrictions apart from some very large event restrictions and still wearing masks. So again, they're asked to model something which was very extreme. So you hear the numbers which are quite alarming about the chance of a resurgence, 41% or whatever. But in fact, that's only if we said today, let's open up for everything, which I don't think anyone was expecting us to do. So I just don't know why we don't use these models better so that the questions asked are what happens with today's numbers if we open up to the next step, which we're planning to do, and does the 5 kilometre rule make any difference? And, to actually be much more sophisticated.
You mentioned before we started the interview that you were, concerned about the public health messaging around what's going on. Can you explain to my audience what you mean by that?
The public health messaging has changed throughout. It was people criticised public health messaging at the start because it was a bit confused. We have different messages coming from the Australian government and across different states. But in fact, we kind of got into the mode of understanding a bit more about the outbreak, starting to twig that the numbers were important and following that and understanding the conversations behind the rules. And especially as we came out of that first wave, it really was a partnership. You know, we were being given information, we were being asked to act in certain ways. People did that well enough that it worked. When we came into the second wave, it's always more terrifying when you're in the start of a major climb in a second wave. But criticism started to happen around the processes. So there was concern about how the health department was managing contact tracing in particular. And so it became a bit defensive. And in fact, you know, they were rebuilding the program on the fly, but we'd also get messages that said, no, it's all good. And then we'd hear later that, you know, it was under the pump and we needed more people. And it was that confused messaging undermined people's trust in the very processes that were there to protect them. Then you combine that with the hotel incidents that started to come out into the public place when people realised how important they were, and in fact, you know, progressively people realised that it was completely responsible for that second wave. So then you have other things built in. So you've got to manage that in your public health messaging and the kind of concern about how the system's coping and that annoyance and anger that we're going through this when we didn't need to. A very powerful emotions in a population to work with when you're already in the middle of a public health crisis. And I think what's happened then is the response has become much more domineering than engaging. So that it has focused on enforcement, it's focused on fines, which I think is an unfortunate way to go and should be a last resort. But particularly when you've already got this concern in the community about, you know, whether whatever we do really matters if you're not chasing down the outbreaks fast enough or you gave us the virus back in the first place. So it is hard to manage, but it's progressively kept going down that path. And in the background, it's a polarised conversation. It's now trying to reinforce the rules by saying, you know, we will have another explosive outbreak, or you will have to be in these restrictions forever is the kind of message. And that's not the way to engage people, particularly who've been in lockdown for so long. You really do need to explain to them exactly how it's working, why we need to be where we are now, and make that very much evidence-based. And I think we've just heard lots of comments. It's all data-driven. It's what the experts or scientists or doctors tell the Premier. But in fact, when they show us what's behind it, there's not a lot there. We're still kind of working off global understanding of it's more risky indoors and outdoors. That's true, but we've got rich data in the second wave that could tell us about which are the safe industries to open. But instead, we've got rules that mean tennis courts are out even with your own equipment, cricket nets, they're okay. You can get your dog washed down at the dog washing shop, the dog grooming shop, but the dog groomer can't come with their mobile unit to the front of your house. And there's no epidemiological difference in risk in a lot of these things. Same in work, you know, the whole issue around our landscape gardeners, and you can't have two on the block even if they're not together working outdoors, which they need for safety or else they can't operate. So it's this inconsistency that comes through not just in the rules themselves, but also even in the conversations about those rules and the defence of rules. And so you wind up with a very paternalistic kind of, well, just do it, you know, do what you're told. We need to do it. This is what we need, or else, you know, the boogeyman comes. You know, we either have more restrictions or we have explosive outbreaks. And the whole point is, after all this time, we shouldn't have any outbreaks. We will have cases, but outbreaks is when it gets out of control. And everything, you know, now is pointing to us being much, much better, chasing down, identifying, detecting outbreaks, as well as closing them off. So, you know, I think we just have to switch the messaging right back to saying we've got this.
Have you heard the term public health terrorism, and how do you feel about that?
I haven't heard it, but I can imagine where it's coming from at the moment. Look, I think there's been a lot going on now in the public forum about how the rules, particularly with the omnibus legislation and so on, that concerns people. What is motivating this? And I think that comes back to the fact you want to be very clear about the evidence supporting different parts of the intervention. And when we had that whole public conversation about the curfew, for example, and then finding out it wasn't a recommendation of the health department or of the chief health officer or his team, then it raises a whole lot of questions about what is this really, and I do think we've kind of come back to first principles in this state, which is, and the Premier says this often, but movement equals virus, and that's about as basic a view of epidemiology you could probably have, and as blanket a view. Like, okay, you can't really deny that there's some truth in that, but that's in fact how we're operating, and we should be operating at the other end. In other conversations, the Premier himself will say, it's not that you cross the 5 kilometre rule in Casey, it was that they went to someone's home. It's what you do that matters. And to me, that's where epi sits. It's what you do. That's where risk plays out. They don't necessarily know what those risks are because they haven't had the chance to analyse the data. The data's not collected in a way that's easily analysable at this stage. But also, they don't trust people anymore. And so they pull the rules back tighter and tighter. And I think there are things being done in the name of public health that some people will question. And I'm sure, I don't know if that's where you're going with the terrorism, but I'm sure there are people that see this as an element of control and it's not about the virus at all. But I see it as, and I've said it before, it's almost like a fear. So it's going back to first base, to say, well, it's got away from us. It's a terrible outbreak. Let's shut everything down because that will work. And it's true, it will, at what a cost. And did you have to shut everything down? And that's where I think we are now. We have to start opening up and people have to know it is safe, and reinforcing this risk of resurgence or outbreaks or how wildly infectious the virus is. People know it's an awful virus. It was worth fighting. It was worth closing down for in the first instance. But we now need to open up, and we shouldn't be so fearful of it. We should feel like we have this terrible virus under control, and that's where we're at.
If you had 30 seconds or a minute of Daniel Andrews' undivided attention, what would you say to him?
I think I would say exactly what we're talking about in terms of public health messaging. We should be confident, and the public need to see that confidence. And the confidence at the moment is in their statements around this will come back. This is wildly infectious. If we don't get it right, if we don't shut it down, if we can't get the numbers low so we can keep them low, this will come back. In fact, what the public want to hear is we have absolutely fixed the contact tracing. Here's an example from the last outbreak. This is how it actually works. Let's use the data better and actually communicate it. Move away from that standard speech we have every day and actually cut straight into the kind of conversations we get from the press pack. That's when the real conversation starts. So that's when, they should bring that up front. They should own that conversation and build everyone's confidence that we won't be conservative anymore beyond the limits. We'll go as fast as we can and it will be safe.
Remember, all of the interviews are actually quite long. We just don't have time to post them all on the show. So keep an eye out after the Friday night airing. We always put the full interviews up on the YouTube page, Facebook page.
Yeah.
And that interview with her was quite long, right?
It was really hard to edit, yeah.
Yeah, but there's a really good 20, 30-minute version upcoming soon.
40 minutes.
40 minutes. All right. Morgan C. Jonas, had to sit down with him, and very interesting news on the testing kits coming out of China. Throughout this entire COVID experience, we've had, first of all, we're measuring the number of morbid outcomes, deaths. Then we're measuring the number of cases. Then we're measuring the number of tests. And we seem to be testing a wider and wider variety of things now. We're testing sewage. So we have now some surveillance programs in workplaces where it's about the number of tests, not even necessarily about the testing outcomes. So we're going to talk today to someone who's quite expert in this now. Morgan C. Jonas joins us to talk about what is going on behind these testing kits. And he's actually about to release a documentary or a presentation in the coming couple of weeks, which I'm very intrigued to hear about. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What is going on with testing? I don't get it at all, so educate me.
Yep, not a problem. So I've dedicated a lot of hours over the past month or so into looking into everything that I could find out specifically about the COVID-19 test kits, the PCR test kits that are being used in Victoria. And I've delved deep into this subject. It was troubling to me the extent that Daniel Andrews is using all types of what I would consider to be manipulative tactics in a bid to coerce Victorians into getting tested, including but not limited to what I would consider exploiting the deaths of people who have passed away, etc. So I went down a big rabbit hole to find out as much information as I could. The supplier of these test kits, the deal that was facilitated to set the framework for the importation of these test kits, the company that is behind the manufacturing of these test kits, and the reliability of the kits as well. So I basically embarked on a mission to find out as much as I could, because I just had a real feeling that Victorians were not getting the full picture.
Why do you get that feeling?
Okay, so since the start of the pandemic, I've noticed a very strong push by the government to compel citizens to get tested. And the policy that is driven through the Daniel Andrews government is based on what they consider to be positive COVID-19 test results via these PCR test kits. So if this is what's driving our policy, I wanted to understand what the basis for it was and where this is all coming from.
Fair enough. Do you feel like that has changed over the last few months, like I said in the intro? But he seems to be putting more and more emphasis on these tests.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you've noticed, less people are actually getting tested. You can see via the statistics, you can see via driving around, and you're noticing that testing stations are empty. So as this has happened and an interest in getting tested has decreased, you've seen tactics by the government to try and ramp up testing once again. We've seen water and sewage, which is supposedly turning up COVID-19 positive, and the government urging people in entire regions to go and get tested.
Asymptomatic, I've seen now. Even if you have zero symptoms, they say go and get tested.
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing now entire workplaces and the government now mandating the testing of people, most notably in the public sector, but that will probably expand to the private sector. So definitely I see a conceded attempt to ramp up testing.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, didn't Daniel Andrews just talk about making, mandatory testing in high risk
it's
places?
Here already.
So,
Supermarkets and so on.
Yeah, but so it's a really good timing that you're bringing this out now, because I imagine you have some really interesting information in that presentation. Do you want to give us a snippet of something to intrigue the viewers to watch out for your documentary?
Yep, definitely. So there's a few key points that I'm looking at, and this is mostly specifically in regards to the COVID-19 test kits being used in Victoria. So what we're looking at is the setting for which set the framework for the importation of the test kits being used in Victoria under what I would consider to be inappropriate circumstances between a private businessman and a Chinese-based conglomerate called BGI Tech. We're talking about the company behind the test kits, BGI Group, and their links to human rights abuses in China, including but not limited to forced DNA harvesting and medical testing, etc. And we're talking about the ineffectiveness of the PCR tests as well, and the security risks that have been alleged by various experts around the world regarding BGI equipment and BGI tests.
So these tests that we're using in Victoria, 100% of the tests or some of the tests are coming from BGI?
It's difficult to ascertain exactly where they're coming from, but Victoria is the only state to have confirmed using the test kits from BGI. This is according to an article published in The Guardian that reached out to all states. So what it appears is that Victoria is the only state to have confirmed using these test kits.
Oh, okay. So it's not the same across all states?
It does not appear that way.
Well, that's concerning in itself, right?
Well, I would have thought this is a bit of a crazy discussion a couple of months ago, but we've seen, now I'm on your side, because we've seen with the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, we've seen with the trains and tram scandal that's going on at the moment using Uyghur people. We've seen the human rights abuses and so on in China with the Uyghur people. I'm very concerned about this. And if you're telling me that all of our testing kits, or a large majority, are coming from this Chinese company, that is definitely something you want to hear about in this documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go into more detail on the parallels BGI Group has also recently partnered with the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Belt and Road Initiative is moving beyond infrastructure into the world of biotechnology, medical infrastructure. This is a company, this is an organization that runs China's national gene bank, a gene bank being a concept that was previously rejected in Australia, but BGI is now making a name for themselves, building this type of infrastructure around the world. And due to this agreement, this company has been able to attain a foothold in the Australian market, which falls in line with the industrial ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party. So it's too much to ignore. And quite frankly, the people of Victoria have not been given the full story into the origins of these test kits, the studied ineffectiveness of PCR tests, and this is what I'm going to talk about.
Okay, and how do we keep an eye out for it? What are we following? What pages?
Just follow me on my Facebook, Morgan C. Jonas.
Yep.
I'm going to announce soon the release date, and I expect to have this out within the next week and a half.
Great. Look forward to seeing.
Cannot wait.
Yep. Thank you
Yeah.
for coming in.
Thank you.
Well, the title of his presentation is "Don't Get Tested." It's pretty
I
full on.
forgot to ask. Yes, that's
Don't get tested. So I can't wait to see that. Just remember, go to Morgan C. Jonas, the Facebook page, and it's going to be released in the next 10 days. And I think it's going to be pretty breaking news. So I look forward to that. Now, next we have Catherine Cumming, who you all remember did some actions with her hands in front of Parliament a couple of weeks ago. And look, I just really enjoyed chatting to her. She is so genuine, and you can forget that she's a member of Parliament for a few minutes. So, this is what we chatted about.
Catherine, what would you have done, and what should we be doing instead of what we're doing now?
I still believe that they should accept more ADF support. So, but it's not too late to get additional ADF and to actually help us with what's going on now. So I don't think there's any time that they can't accept ADF support and even have it in a different role or capacity. The other thing that they should be doing is being more involved in their local councils. Everyone should understand that councils are an arm of the state government. We've got 79 councils with health departments.
And environmental health officers are in the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. They
as authorised officers.
Yes.
So, so everyone's paying rates at the moment. They've got their councils there with staff that would be happily to be redeployed, a bit more educational training and be able to actually help. And I can give you an example that Wyndham City Council, so in the West, did this. The local GPs as a network, and I got a letter from one of the local GPs just explaining how they've done it. Virtually, when they have a patient that is COVID positive, they say to the patient, do you give permission for us to give your details on to the local council so they can help give you additional help and supports? But they also, the GP also contacts the health department as well. So like any infectious diseases, that two pathways are there. So then you're actually getting a local response, and you're getting that person under, understanding that they need to isolate or and then they're getting all of that support almost immediately.
So it's like locking down the person with the disease instead of trying to lock down the whole state.
So currently we're controlling the people who are healthy rather than controlling the infectious disease.
Okay.
So we need to flip that.
We need to flip that. So we need to really get on top of, they're calling it contact tracing, but what we got to get in control of is the infection and the disease and not allowing it to be continually contagious.
But it seems like we're not going to do that, and we're going to barrel on into Christmas under lockdowns, maybe with a few crumbs of release and then back into lockdown afterwards.
Yeah, and you can thank the government with their 6-month lockdown policy, that's what's going to happen.
So what is going to happen with, the 5-kilometre rule, the masks, what's going to happen over the next 10 months?
Without the government actually getting on top of controlling, understanding everyone who's got the disease and controlling the infected people, they're not going to get on top of this. But we also have to learn how to live with it, because there isn't a virus apart from smallpox that I know that we've actually eradicated.
That's true.
and
We live with them.
we have to live with them, and it has to be part of every shop, the way we live, physical distancing, washing your hands, and hand sanitizer.
How effective is it for people? Because they're wondering what they can do. And or especially Monica says to her members, go and email and contact your local independents. Does that work? How do you find that when we're calling you, emailing
It works for me.
Because you read them.
Yeah, because I read them as well as I read all the Facebook comments. But I feel that it's working with the government too.
Emailing Labor MPs?
Yeah, the government. Yeah, Labor is the government.
They always can us with. We've all done it. They just say, "Oh, we need it for this reasons." I'm not sure that. Do you think we should keep sending those emails?
Well, I don't know. I watch social media.
Yeah.
I read a lot of social media. I try not to partake because it's just one of those medium that's just too much. But the government's messaging is it's working. What we're doing is working. What we're doing is it's working.
The campaigning, you mean?
No.
The cases are down and
yeah.
all that.
That's right.
Okay.
That's their messaging. If you haven't got their subliminal messaging, their messaging, their media messaging is it's working,
Yes,
it's working,
keep
it's
going.
working.
No, but it's also saying if you stop getting tested, if you don't listen to the rules though, we're going to go back into
Lockdown,
worse.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
true.
they're preparing us for the worst case scenario all the time, don't you feel?
Correct. No, I think they're preparing you to realise that they're not going to ease restrictions at all.
That's.
What do you mean? What?
But, well,
You're scaring me.
What about Christmas? No easing?
I actually think, we might have a Christmas, but then you would think that if they're not on top of this tracing and understanding and actually controlling people who have got an infectious disease and that kind of thing, we're just going to be back like this again. This is not going to stop.
How's that even possible when you've got New South Wales next door doing a great job at contact tracing, or at least a much better job, similar case numbers to us, and mostly a free society? People are going to riot.
How? When you can't leave more than 5 kilometres? How have you got even the possibility to congregate to protest? Do you think that 5K is for to control the virus? When there's areas that don't have the virus, but that's still there?
Wow. To control.
You can't protest.
Some of your constituents aren't even within 5 kilometres of a grocery store.
Correct.
So it's just not even
for myself,
usable.
I understood the premise of when they've got an outbreak in a particular area. So at the very start, they were saying Maidstone has a lot of particular cases, or they said the Flemington Walkup Flats have a lot of particular cases. We need to go in there. We need to test everyone because we need to see what's going on there. I get that. When you're talking about 5Ks or this or that at that particular spot or a suburb or even a local government area, you can understand that. But at the moment, that's not what they're talking about. They're keeping us restricted from 5Ks, but the 5K zones isn't working for everybody because in my area, 5Ks, a lot of people don't have a bus stop, they don't have a shop. Their 5Ks is horrible. The government has to stop that 5K zone. It has to look upon they got to get back to looking at people who have got the virus and controlling the outbreak of the virus, not making healthy people feel like they're doing something wrong all the time. So that's the other messaging that I'm constantly hearing that really, I guess, upsets me the most is how they. And I see it in other people's messaging. If people weren't doing the wrong thing, we wouldn't be in this situation. What's the wrong thing? I don't understand, because if you catch the doctor in me says empathy. When someone's got a flu, oh, you gave me the flu. Oh, you're doing the wrong thing. No, most people are more caring about if they've got a virus that they caught it. They don't feel like
they've committed a crime.
Or somebody did it to me on purpose. They gave me the virus on purpose. No, it's not. None of those things. I'm finding it really sad that people who are healthy are getting fines. You're going to get $5,000 fine if you hang around another bunch of healthy people. That makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me when I'm seeing the response in the way of people who are wearing masks or gathering in a park, or, that makes no sense, the way that the police are jumping on to somebody. Obviously, they don't feel that person's infectious, because you wouldn't jump on them. You wouldn't actually jump on them if you're really scared of this virus that you're going to catch of someone. If you're going to handcuff, even with little gloves and a little bit of a mask, if this is an infectious person, you're jumping on people because you feel that they're healthy and safe. Because I would, if I thought that person had COVID, I wouldn't have that response. I wouldn't be jumping on them.
Be running away from them.
You'd want a hazmat suit, what I mean? You want PPE, you want all of that.
Interesting.
So, and you can hear even with the messaging from the government, they're saying, well, the reason why we've got compulsory masks, it's easier to police. So it's easier for the police to be able to fine you. So if we were a bit more discerning and actually saying you need a mask when you're around vulnerable people. So when you're around elderly, or if you go into a hospital, you need to wear a mask. If you're on public transport, you need to wear a mask. If you go into shopping centres or in a space where you can't physical distance, you need to wear a mask. But that's not easily policed, is it? So why aren't we trusting the community when you educate them, you give them that information, that they go off and they do it because they want, if they have an elderly, if my mum came over to my house, I'd be going, Mum, we all wear masks, we can visit.
Yeah.
So we know that we can make sure that she's safe.
Catherine, you're so logical. You're talking about dealing with the problem in front of you. So if you've got a disease, deal with it. It's the most logical. It makes
Correct.
So much sense.
So there's something going wrong with that in the way of understanding where the virus is, looking after infectious people, because we should be open and just dealing with what you would consider there's a virus in the community. We all have to keep ourselves safe. Mm-hmm. And it's personal responsibility. Wear a mask, carry a mask with you, put it on when you need to.
Sure. And you actually have a background in medicine, don't you?
I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine, so
Yes.
I have a degree in health science. I did 10 years in the Army Reserves as a medic, so different kind of first aid training, like, someone got shot by a gun, like fix that kind of thing.
Cool.
Great. So it's a different level, but and preventative medicine, what they call a preventative medicine technician, which is dealing with communicable diseases, making sure. It's like a health officer in a council. So I could be an authorised officer.
Great.
I wouldn't mind if you were one.
Yeah.
Some of the others.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your viewpoint, because with your background and the fact that you're a member of Parliament, it means a lot to everyone watching.
But these 5K zones needs to change. It either needs to go to 20Ks, or you look at a local government area, or you look at a suburb, which was what the government was saying at the very start. If we see an outbreak, we're going to concentrate on that area. But somehow it's changed.
The whole thing's a joke. It should all go. Let's be honest. It should all go.
No, it should be, we need a very,
So are you going to bring up the 5 kilometre rule in Parliament on Tuesday?
I am bringing that up as one of my 60-minute, 90 seconds.
60 seconds.
60 seconds,
Don't
90
talk
seconds.
for 60 minutes about the...
No, please. No, please.
No, that's great. Well, we'll be watching you in Parliament on Tuesday. So thank you so much for coming in, Catherine. Really appreciate it.
Nice to meet you too.
So good to meet you. Okay, bye. Why am I waving at her? What am I doing? Oh.
Because we're so excited to meet each other.
Well, I'm behind Catherine coming 100%. And
anyone who is against the lockdown should be behind Catherine. I didn't realise how much she wants it to all end and us to go to a more rational, let's look after our own lives.
Just makes a lot of sense, really. And we should all be behind her. And on Tuesday, she'll be in Parliament, and, I'll be rallying for her and airing all of her speeches.
Yes, you will. Well, the rationality doesn't stop there. I spoke to a lawyer this week, which you haven't seen yet, right?
No.
This interview is a practicing solicitor in New South Wales, specialises in criminal and family law. But Interestingly, I asked him what the feel in the legal fraternity is like. And sure enough, just like we all suspect, they want the lockdowns gone as well. So check it out.
Look, essentially, I think what we're trying to do is minimize the spread and essentially figure out the best way to minimize the spread of COVID-19 and what the virus essentially is. There's a number of opinions on this. I think one of the first things to understand is there are still people that believe it doesn't exist. There's people that believe it does exist. Whichever camp you stand in, I think it doesn't really change what we're talking about, and that's the control that we give our governments over our lives. So this kind of functions like, I guess, what's the best word? It's like martial law to some respect, or state of emergency as we use here in Australia. What is too far? What is not? Who gets discretion to make decisions? Who does not? So I think what we're essentially trying to do is give certain people decision-making power to say, okay, no, you guys should stay home. Look, we're not in the sense of lockdown that you guys are at the moment. And I think we've now been outside that for a period of time, but we do have similar rules that do give certain authorities power to control what happens. Now, for example, we still have restrictions on how many people you can have at a residence, restrictions on how many people you can have at a restaurant, pub or club, and certain things like that. So generally speaking, it is an attempt to try and stop people gathering, for lack of a better phrase, or minimize the interaction people have. But the way it's been done, I think, is a problem. And generally the fact that Australians overall are sick of it. And you can see, I mean, sure, in Melbourne, when you've been in effective lockdown for 6 months, I don't understand how the population isn't going to be sick of it, because you're not allowed to see your friends, family, and mental health is a huge issue right now. So what do we need to do about that? So these are things that I don't think have been considered or factored in properly when introducing laws like this or giving authorities power to keep people at home.
So Sam, it's interesting you say that Australians are sick of it. Obviously here in Victoria, you know, there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of people rising up saying this is not right, it's causing a lot of damage. But what's the feel in New South Wales? Because from our point of view, New South Wales looks fairly open, fairly normal, fairly free. Are people happy up there?
I would dare say a lot happier than what you guys are down there. And it's unfortunate as well. So I have a number of friends and family who are in Melbourne, people that I'm chatting to on a daily basis. So it's not that I'm totally afar or totally outstretched from what's happening. It's just I'm obviously not in that position. So my view is through people that I've interacted with. And I can tell you 6 months inside a house, especially if you're a social person, is not a good thing. Video calls just don't cut it. And when you have friends and family that you can't even see and you're stuck within a 5 kilometre radius, that is a problem. What you're saying is apt. I think generally New South Wales has started to move on. We are a lot freer. We're travelling a lot more regularly. There are still people working from home, which I think is probably one of the good things that's come out of COVID. However, putting that aside, there is still, I guess, an underlying fear with some people that something like this could happen again. And funnily enough, some people have actually said, what happens if we open the borders to Victoria? What if we have a second wave? I think that's a bit of an uneducated opinion, but I have heard that nonetheless. And people are getting scared because of that. We are not, we do hear what's happening down there. I especially have heard what's happening down there. And I think even in New South Wales, we hit a point where people were just sick of it. They just wanted things to open up, because when you couldn't travel anywhere, when you had to stay at home, there's that maybe 1 month period where you might actually enjoy it, because now you don't have to go to work, you can work from home. After that, it becomes a chore, you're restricted, your liberty is restricted. And generally it takes a little bit of time to hit that. Once people did hit that, you found people were complaining and they're not happy about it. You guys have been in that situation for a lot longer. So it's very obvious that people are going to be at this point where it's not acceptable anymore. And it comes down to, is this even the right way to deal with it when we're taking people's liberty, something that we take very highly here in Australia generally, and restricted that for 6 months? It's nearly past half a year. And this is most likely unprecedented for most of us, unless we've come from certain countries where we might have actually had these types of issues.
Well, you raised the letter from the QCs, former High Court Justice Michael McHugh. We've had the Dean of Dean of Law from Swinburne Uni here say that most likely we've created our first political prisoners. He thinks the High Court will throw out a lot of these COVID-related fines. So what is your understanding of what could happen in the rollout of this with the legal side of things? We haven't seen a single COVID fine make it into court, as revealed by our Attorney General recently. What do you think the legal system will do when it finally gets the chance to speak in the coming months?
I generally agree with that. And I do think a lot of this are going to be, you've got constitutional issues here effectively as well, and you're going to have a number of other issues that actually play a part. It's very easy to hand out these fines when at the moment, as you said, nothing's been tested. Legally speaking, we need someone to actually fight it and take it up. Now, how that's going to come, when that's going to come, I'm not sure. But the sooner, the better for me. And I think people are starting to realize that too. That's why I was seeing videos and pictures of people just deciding they're going to go to the beach. They don't really care what the restrictions are. They're just going to do it now. Because I think people are starting to realize that this is, I wouldn't go as far as saying definitely unconstitutional. It's not proven, but it's heading down that path. I do think it's dramatic in a way to say political prisoners, but it's not wrong either. I guess technically speaking, it's probably an apt way to categorize it or phrase it. I don't think this is going to hold up eventually. And some of the other issues I've seen is the people that are getting fined. So there is a bit of an argument in the legal fraternity that you're seeing an overwhelming majority of fines are being given to Aboriginal persons, so Indigenous Australians and all, to Sudanese people. That's an issue in itself as well. So how equal are these fines? How much discretion is at play? Because often the police officers who are handing these fines out do have discretion. So how are they using that? And why are they using that? We don't know. We're just hoping that they do it for the right reason. So when you give certain people a lot of power, you're hoping they use it in the right way. And that's something that's going to come to challenge as well, I think.
Because you're a practicing solicitor, you would be seeing this a lot, where there's a lot of laws around Australia at the moment coming out where the government, it feels a bit lazy, like they're doing very broad bills at the moment with lots of discretionary powers everywhere. Why do you think that governments are going towards that model of legislation at the moment?
I think one, it's easier to look like you're doing something. And then also you're then giving the courts the power to apply it in a way they want. Discretion isn't always bad, understandably, and sometimes we need discretion. But then what the courts look to when they are applying, especially in the case of a brand new bill that becomes an act, is what the parliamentarians have said, what the politicians have said. They'll look to the legislation, what the second reading speech says, and the reason for it. I think it's easier to make it discretionary, and then you can say, oh, well, it was for this part, but if it doesn't apply, if it's really not the case, the court can decide a certain way. So it gives that side of the judiciary a little bit more power. And that way it still looks like the government's doing something as well. I think that's probably the reason. But a lazy is probably a good way to put it. Rather than investigating it thoroughly, looking into it thoroughly, how it should apply, it's just a matter of, okay, here it is. This is the checks and balance. We'll just have some discretion. That's it. Get it over and done with.
Shouldn't this be a good thing where we're giving the judiciary more discretion, because that will balance out in terms of the balance of powers? They might be able to correct some of the overreaches by the executive, by the police.
Of course, that is a good thing. But the problem is we're going to overload our court systems, which are already not exactly dealing with everything correctly in the first place. Not correctly, sorry, take that back. They've already got a heavy workload. How much more are we going to force on the courts? Now, if we just keep making things an offence, criminalise it, chuck it into court, sure, the courts can correct the error, but how many times are they going to need to correct the error?
Sam, can you give us some inside information on the legal fraternity? What is the feel at the moment inside about lockdowns, about the fines, about just everything that's going on? What is the perspective of lawyers in general?
I think it's a difficult one, because even with lawyers, there's both sides. And don't forget, the government's got its own lawyers as well who might even think a different way too. I think generally speaking, people do things, or we do things, for the good of our clients and for the people. And the government should be the same, you'd hope. Now, the problem is you have had a situation where everyone's kind of over it, generally speaking. And a lot of my colleagues they don't have the same work they used to have. They're not able to perform their function in court the same way. Yes, there's video systems which now allow certain things, but you can't actually run matters like you used to run them. So they're economically struggling as well. Clients being able to contact them and find them isn't easy either, because it's much easier to walk down the road and see, okay, there's a number of law firms, let's chat to someone. a lot of people don't know you can search on the internet and actually go to the Law Institute of Victoria's website or the Law Society of New South Wales website and find lawyers there. There's people who don't know that. But generally, I think what we want to see is an end to lockdown, and we want to see states open up. There's a lot of people who want to travel, have family interstate. We obviously don't want to spread the pandemic. We don't want to make it worse than it is. But I think overall, we want to see stuff opening up again, and we want to see if the government is going to take action that it's legal, good for the people, and not overreaching their powers. We don't want to see, I guess, a draconian style of system, which I've heard some commentators say. We need to make this, I guess, fair, but also reasonable. And at the moment, I think that's one issue. I don't know if this is reasonable anymore. I think it's hit that point where they've probably gone too far, especially, again, using the example of Victoria. We need to start scaling back. I mean, officially speaking, I just don't see what grounds the party or what legs the Labor Party in Victoria has to stand on right now. There's a lot of animosity from people who are generally Labor voters over there as well against them, because I just think the handling of the situation has not been up to par. And that's what I feel I've been told by my colleagues as well, the Liberal fraternity.
Sam, look, thank you so much for coming on and being a voice of clarity and being bold enough to just speak out. I think there's tens of thousands of people watching this show right now, and on behalf of them, we're looking for people to just stand up and give us their opinion, good or bad, and I really want to thank you for doing that. To finish off the show, some good news. The Omnibus Bill has been mostly neutered now. We have the government backing down on, I think, about 90% of the problems in it. Preemptive detention is gone. The expansion into you can be classified as high risk if you have COVID is gone. So I think it's a good thing.
That's good news. And actually, it's because of the campaigning.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
Is, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I'm still worried. I'm still worried, Matt, because I just don't trust the government, and I think a lot of people don't. And I think that they're doing something sneaky in the background, or they're playing mind games. And I'm looking for that. I hope it's not there, though.
Fair enough. But look, overall, it does reveal why the hell did the government put this up in the first place. Don't trust me. Trust the former High Court Justice Michael McHugh. Trust all the QCs coming out. Trust the doctors coming.
Yes.
This was crazy bill, so it should never get up in the first place. Now, I'm being told the only way to send the Labor government a message is through these council elections.
Yes.
What are we doing with
Well,
it?
it's the first time that we're actually able to have an election since this has all been happening. So we really need to take this seriously, because actually Labor have mostly controlled council in Victoria for a very long time. And if you're a Labor candidate endorsed by Labor, they actually control all your financial decisions and other decisions. It's in their constitution. So I think it is important that we send them a message by putting Labor last in the council elections. So before you put in your vote, make sure you're putting Labor last.
You know, to be fair, I have voted Labor previously in New South Wales, and you've said a lot of your members actually have been lifelong Labor voters. So you got to understand, this is hard for some people to do.
It's not about, we don't hate Labor members, by the way. We don't hate Labor as a whole. I'm sure there'll be some issues that we actually side with Labor on in the future. It's just that right now, they've done the wrong thing.
This is the only way we can send a message, a political black eye through council elections, Labor last. All right.
What else can we do?
All right. So we are also being very defensive right now in the sense that the Labor government has been coming for a lot of our freedoms. They've been locking us down forever and ever. And we've been saying, no, you can't do this new omnibus bill or state of emergency extension. Now, we do have small wins in that they only extended it by 6 months instead of 12, or most of the omnibus bill is gone, but some remains. And you know, in a war, if you're losing a little bit by a little bit, you're still losing.
Yes.
And so my concern is we need to figure out how to stop playing defense and playing offense.
Okay.
That's how you win a war. Now, this is inspired by Sanjeev Sublock,
we interviewed a couple of weeks ago.
yeah, economist who resigned in protest from Treasury. He is actually saying we need constitutional referendums that prevents politicians across this fine nation from engaging emergency powers in any other time besides war. So a formal declaration of war, other than that, you can't do it.
We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. If there's one good thing that comes out of this, and that's what Craig Kelly said as well, is that we will understand that this democracy needs to be fought for, and we don't want to ever be in this situation again. So,
democracy is fragile. And look, so Sanjeev has got all the facts on his side. He's got a lot of data coming out. He's got a book released this week. And I think we're going to try and pivot a bit into, hey, what can we do to actually cement some of our freedoms in this country and take some ground back especially from the Dan Andrews government. So
good on you, Sanjeev. Thank you.
Legend. Episode 5, done and dusted. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next week for episode 6.
Is that okay that I did that at
It's
the
great.
end?
It's
Is it
great.
funny? Okay.
Great.